Okay, well, it's great to be joined by Margaret Anderson Kelliher, Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Transportation. How you doing this afternoon, Margaret?
Doing great, Brian. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to have you as well. And I guess, we'll just jump right in with the big news that everybody's been talking about. And that, of course, is the passage of the big federal transportation bill just about a week ago now. We were just chatting before I started my hit the record button here on the interview. But yeah, pretty big deal. Just big picture wise, what does that mean for Minnesota?
So it means that over the next period of time, the bill covers will be $4.5 billion coming in specifically to Minnesota for roads, bridges, and highway safety, with a focus on climate and equity and those safety issues. There's another additional $300 million that is specific for bridges. And a portion of that is also set aside for local communities, non-state highways, so cities and counties as well. And it also has $68 million for electric vehicle charging, and we can kind of dive in and talk about that, as well as $818 million for public transportation. Largely that public transportation money will likely go to the Metropolitan Council. However, MnDOT also oversees and works with partners in rural communities outside of the metro area on their transit issues. And then there's over $100 million for internet, the other way we move today, which is the virtual way. So that's very exciting too.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And can you talk a little bit about how sort of get into some specifics on how the money might be spent, or sort of the process of, for example, does the federal government have a say in how certain funds can be allocated, or can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so the bill has really kind of two different ways to distribute funds. One is what I was talking about, which is directly coming to the state will be that $4.5 billion over a number of years in the bridge money, things like that. There's also a number of programs that states and communities, cities, counties, others can apply for that are more specific to maybe a type of infrastructure. So there's going to be more bridge money that is available that the state will be interested in for particular bridges. There will be specific money around connecting communities. So lots of people have heard that when the interstate highways came through in the late 50s and early 60s, many communities that were low power and low income, and often communities of color, were separated by the highway. So in our own city, we know this, in Minneapolis and St. Paul, in the Twin Cities, we have many examples of this. And one of the more notable ones is the Rondo neighborhood between Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so there's going to be some category money that we could apply for that will help connect communities. And that's very exciting to have available in the bill.
Yeah, and my understanding was there is some additional funding that state DOTs or cities can apply for that requires some matching funds. Is that what you're talking about there, or is that a separate deal?
Yeah, so we don't know 100% yet what will need to be matched and what won't need to be matched. We have some early indication that some of the bridge money may be 100% federally funded as a real effort to try to take care of these, critical safety issues on our system, as well as economic issues. Many of your listeners probably know when a bridge starts to fall into disrepair, or there's something that we have found wrong with a bridge, then we have to close that bridge or take it down to, maybe 2 lanes instead of 4 lanes. And that causes significant time and delay. And so those monies, we think, are, at least a portion of them, are not going to have to be matched. But generally speaking, federal money in transportation has to have a 20% match to it. We call that the state match. In some cases, it might be a local communities match, but that is an important concept here, because that definitely means that, we have some ideas about how these funds could help Minnesotans. We obviously will be talking to members of the legislature as well as others about their ideas, but we will need an appropriation to match at least some of this funding by 20%.
Well, that's a great segue into the legislative session 2022. What are some of your goals for the session? In addition to maybe getting some of those matching funds.
Yeah. So Brian, we actually were looking at the issues around bridges even before this bill passed federally. So, we know that we have about 650 plus bridges that are in fair condition around the state. We have put together for the governor's consideration a significant capital investment or using bond program that would help repair a number of these bridges. I think that, with this federal money, we're going to have to probably look at, what dollar amount do we need there now? We had put together an $800 million program of bridge repairs. So taking that before the legislature, really working on safety issues. So safety can be everything from folks who are driving in their cars and making cars and trucks and making sure that the roadway itself is safe, intersections are better lighted. There's a number of things that we can do out on Highway 12 this year. We installed a median barrier so that we reduce those deadly head-on crashes out on that section of road. There's a lot of things like that that can happen. But I would also say the other part of safety is for people who are walking, who are riding a bike, who are, maybe using a non-motorized form of transportation or a very low motorized form of transportation, as we've seen the rise of other, small scale electrification type vehicles. We need to make sure that those folks are safe as well. So safety is a major focus in this legislative session of things that we'll be working on and bringing before the legislature. Our budget year was last year. We did have a very good budget session last year, working bipartisanly, House and Senate and the governor. And so I anticipate that, there's going to be some opportunities to be able to hit this funding match for at least the next year or two in terms of what we need federally, and then also being able to work on these other important issues.
Well, yeah, and you certainly know your way around the Capitol, having been House Speaker for what, 4 years or?
Yeah, 4 years.
Yeah, and in the legislature from what, 99 to 2011, something like that. Must be fun for you to do that part of your job and kind of work the halls at the Capitol again, huh?
Well, I think that, one of the things that's been very nice to me for me is reconnecting with former colleagues who are still in the legislature, but also getting to know, new folks who are in the legislature and really, uniquely being a former legislator, you understand some of the pressures that those legislators are under. You understand the rhythm of their schedule and kind of what they're juggling and dealing with. And so I think that's been helpful in connecting with legislators to be able to really share that perspective. But it's also been really fun to have legislators be curious about how an agency like MnDOT works, right? And so that's been really a joy to be able to share more information about all aspects of MnDOT with folks.
Yeah, and sorry about the ringing phone here in the background. couldn't- I
It happens.
Um, yeah, no, that's great insight there. And, just the competing interests too throughout the state. And of course, you've got the people who want just the roads and then the transit people. And how do you balance that? It's kind of a lot of different people to satisfy there.
Yeah, so we need both. We need good roads and good bridges, but we also need more transit in the state. If we want to be able to mitigate the issues around greenhouse gas production, transportation is the largest producer of greenhouse gases today, not only in Minnesota, but around the globe.
Mhm.
And so we need to work together to have these alternatives. And, the alternatives are everything from more electric vehicles, as well as being able to have cleaner fuels. So I am chairing with the Commissioner of Agriculture a group to work on cleaner fuels in Minnesota. Oregon actually did this and has had great success in reducing greenhouse gas emissions with just this one piece of that equation. And then I say all the time, we need more transit. We need transit that's clean, electrified, and being able to get people where they want to go. And it's a time right now, we're still coming out of this pandemic time, we're still in it. So we naturally see that transit ridership is down, but I really believe when you think about 10 years from now, more people are going to be wanting to use transit than ever before.
Yeah, and you mentioned previously the money in the federal bill for electric vehicles, charging stations. Can you expand on that a little bit and what that means for Minnesota? And
Yes, so $68 million will come to Minnesota to work on the issue of the electric vehicle charging network to be able to build that out. And so what I would say to your listeners is the important part here is that we need to have reliability across the state, that if you're using an electric vehicle, that you're not going to get stranded somewhere without the ability to charge. And so it's not that MnDOT or any other government agency is wanting to be in the business of running the electric chargers or owning the electric chargers, but we're interested in helping with the placement of electric chargers around the state to make sure that there is an equitable distribution of electric charging. I don't know exactly what the program will look like, Brian, but I think it looks more like, in Minnesota, we have this award-winning broadband program that's called the Minnesota Model, where what happens is that the state partners with private sector, co-ops, communities to help subsidize the placement of the internet. I think it's a similar sort of model where the state is assisting in both the placement as well as granting out. There's going to be places in the state where for a while there may only be one or two electric vehicles in a county, but people traveling through that county will still need to charge their electric vehicle. And so I think that one of our big things here is making sure that that's distributed. We don't need all the electric vehicle chargers being in the metro area for sure.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and what can you say about the other federal infrastructure bill that's been talked about, the human infrastructure bill or Build Back Better, whatever you want to call it? How does that tie in potentially to your interests as a transportation commissioner?
Yeah, so we actually do need that bill to pass. A number of the funding mechanisms for the larger infrastructure bill that did pass are in the other bill, are in the Build Back Better bill.
Mhm.
And so we know that these two bills work together. I would say that, as Minnesotans and, someone who is in I guess what you would call that sandwich generation, although my kids are a little bit older now. Actually, my kids are helping take care of their grandmother. And when you think, one child in particular, and so when you think about this, there's a lot in that bill that helps families with childcare, helps families as the older generation is aging, being able to make sure that our kids are more ready for school, 3 and 4-year-olds going to preschool. So, we can't only be focused on the physical infrastructure piece of what we need in our great country, but we actually do need to invest in these other systems. They really are systems of care, systems of being able to help families care for young children or older adults. And there's a lot more in there too, but like I said, we need it to pass because actually a lot of the things that are going to help us with electric vehicles and the energy grid are residing in the other bill. And, people have heard a little bit about everything from prescription drug costs, trying to lower those. All of that is in that other bill. So it is needed.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there that addresses climate change, certainly. And I believe you recently wrote an op-ed about climate change and the kind of the role that transportation plays in that very important issue. Would you care to touch on that a little bit and hit some
Yeah.
high points?
So a couple years ago, MnDOT produced a report called Pathways to Decarbonizing the Transportation Sector. And out of that, we formed a group that advises MnDOT right now called the Sustainable Transportation Advisory Council. And that includes folks from the private sector, from advocacy groups, as well as the public sector, who are talking about, how do we lessen the effects of greenhouse gases on Minnesota and beyond, because this isn't singularly just Minnesota. But so we've been working on a number of things. First of all, this is why transit's so important, because we do need to reduce some of our miles that we travel every week and trying to be more mindful. And people can do this today, but I think having a greater plan around it so that you have better options is important. But one of the things is, being more mindful about the trips you're making. We're working with local communities, even on things like land use issues, because, that's a huge driver of what happens when people can't walk to get their groceries, or maybe they can't walk their kids to school. It's really about that marrying up of transportation, land use, other issues. But we also do need to be working on cleaner fuels, as well as this electrification plan, because we know electric vehicles are coming our way. It's not overnight, but we can see that this is an important thing that's happening.
Yeah, and as well as I do that some of the big automakers have already announced that they're going to stop making these ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, after 2030 or 2035 or something. So it's definitely coming, right?
It is. And when I think about it, I also, that's why the clean fuels part is still important, because we know, cars and trucks are being built better today than ever before. They last longer, people hold on to them longer. And so we do need a both and approach to this. We need the electric vehicle charging network to be really robust. At the same time, we also need to make sure what we're putting into those combustion engines is polluting less, because it is directly affecting our greenhouse gas emissions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've been talking for years about the how that ties into our revenue sources for transportation. Of course, the gas tax. What are your thoughts about the revenue sources of the future and how we'll eventually, I guess, phase out that gas tax and go to something more sustainable?
Yeah, the gas tax has been a real workhorse for transportation. It's one of 3 major funding sources in Minnesota, along with your registration of your vehicle tabs and then the sales tax on vehicles. Those three have really been the workhorses of our system. We can see that somewhere probably about year 7, 8, or 9 out from today, the gas tax does start to decline in its production. Doesn't totally fall off, but I think what it means is that we really have to have this both Minnesota and national conversation about how are we going to pay for the infrastructure that we need and that's required for us to be able to move about freely. And so one of the things that's in the federal bill is actually some more money for intrastate pilot on distance-based user fee. So really something that's more based on the miles you travel and looking at, and it's not a full funding mechanism, but it's looking at, how would that work? Could it work with current technologies? That's one option. There are other options out there about what it might look like. It might be some additional way of looking at the electrification portion of this, right? If we're moving towards electrification, is there a way to be able to account for that similar type of revenue that has some growth going forward? I think that for the next year or so, it's going to be harder to get people to focus on that, partly because of the infusion of the federal money into the system. And frankly, our state economically is doing pretty well and has a pretty robust economy right now. So I think it's going to be a little bit down the road that we're having the conversation about what's the substitution for the gas tax.
Okay. And I guess while we're looking down the road, we can also look into the recent past, which is, I know that MnDOT just recently announced the completion of another construction season, 261 projects completed or advanced, I believe. What are your thoughts on that? Certainly some big projects. The I-35W at 94 immediately comes to mind. Huge $239 million project. I think everybody's just glad to see that done. But
4 years of patience by people having to change their routes, drive in different ways. It has a state-of-the-art bus facility right at Lake Street with, metropolitan councils bringing online a number of bus rapid transit lines that will also use that corridor. It's super exciting, but we also had projects like Highway 14 between Owatonna and Dodge Center. Highway 14 being a real workhorse of a road across southern Minnesota and needed safety upgrades where the roadway is now divided, 4 lanes. Really, we see a lot more traffic going between Rochester and 35W nowadays over to Mankato. So that's a big one. We have a number of projects that completed out to the west or are in process. We have sort of phases of projects up on 94 going out of the Twin Cities. I was just up at what was once called the Brockton interchange. It's now called the Dayton Parkway interchange. And that is a lovely stretch of road, both from the standpoint of 94, but also up above it with Dayton Parkway and a much safer design, new interchange. So I think people are really gonna like that. We have more work to do out on 94 for sure. The Highway 12 project that we're working on this year, which is really a safety project. There's been too many fatal crashes and life-changing injury crashes on Highway 12, US 12. So working to put in that center median out there that divides the highway. And, it doesn't mean that there will never be a crash again, but the likelihood of a head-on crash, it nearly is taken away when you have one of those medians in place. So a number of important projects that have been completed around the system and really excited for that work.
yeah, and the roundabouts, people love them or hate them, but I happen to be a big fan of them. You talked about, eliminating some of the dangerous T-bone crashes, and that's exactly what what they do, and I'm a big fan of them, but
I'm glad you are, and I hope your listeners, who maybe someone's listening, they think, really, do you need to make that roundabout? I don't like it. I don't like the idea of it, but it does exactly what you're talking about, Brian. It takes away that T-bone crash. It takes away that head-on crash. You can still have a crash, but it's usually a side swipe, right? Or something like that. It's not nearly as catastrophic for the people in the vehicle. And the other part of it is it actually keeps traffic moving in most cases better than a stop sign. And, it takes away idling, which, is a waste of the resource of gasoline, but it also just helps keep that traffic going in the right direction by the utilization of the roundabout. There's some studies that have been done that if people who are against the roundabout, when they first hear about it in a roadway, are like, something around the range of 80% opposed. But 2 months after a roundabout is installed and working, that drops down to only about 15% of the people being opposed to the roundabout. So roundabouts work. They're a change in our driving patterns and behaviors. And we're trying to get better at it all the time too, in terms of the type of roundabouts we are advising on or installing on our system.
yeah. Well, that's great. I live in Richfield here, and we have a number of roundabouts, and what I like is you don't have to sit there at a red light when there's no traffic. You can just go right on through, and
Yep,
you kind of touched on it. You're not idling there
right.
much, but anyway, I just had to get in a word about roundabouts. So,
Thank you for that.
Margaret, well, we've covered a lot of ground there, and you've been generous with your time. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before I let you go, or?
Well, if folks should keep their ears open about ways that we're going to get input on the federal money coming into the state. We're looking forward to finding ways to engage with people on things that they see that need to be improved and upgraded, as well as these other important values of, climate remediation, reducing our greenhouse gases, as well as equity and fairness in our transportation system.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to that, and a lot of challenges, but some exciting news too here. So,
Yes.
so
Thank you for having me as a guest today. It's been great.
yeah. Well, thank you, and have a great day. We'll talk to you again soon, hopefully.
Sounds terrific. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks. Take care.